Such a nice day today, isn't it? Too bad we have such depressing readings. You know, it's not like a miracle story of multiplication of the loaves and the fishes. It's not a feel-good gospel like, take my yoke upon me, for I am meek and humble of heart. Nope. Instead, Jesus predicts that he will die. He was like us in every way but sin. So every human person eventually passes away. We're all terminal. We just don't know the exact term. So he correctly predicts that he will die fairly soon and violently. So as I was reflecting upon this reading for getting ready for today, by coincidence, this past week I met with a lawyer friend of mine to redo my will since my mom passed away. And so after getting Father Zach and somebody else in the rectory to witness it, my lawyer friend made the surprising observation to me that based on his unscientific survey, about 75% of people don't have wills. He did note, however, that since COVID began, a lot more folks are thinking about and executing their wills. You only need a will, of course, if you assume you're eventually going to die. If you don't assume that, then you don't need a will. In St. Peter around today, he would probably be in the 75% cohort who don't want to think about dying and don't want to think about wills. He certainly didn't want to think about Jesus' death, nor his own. Maybe at that point in his life, he didn't experience many deaths in his family. He was probably at this point in his life middle-aged. And you know what middle age is? Middle age is defined by some as when your broad mind and your narrow waist begin to change places. When your broad mind and your narrow waist change places, switches. Well, it seems to me that's what happens to St. Peter in the gospel passage from last week to this week. His broad mind has quickly become very narrow. Because last week, if you remember, we heard Peter say to Jesus, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Today, completely different, he says, "God forbid, Lord, that anything bad should happen to you." So in 1 week, Peter's gone from this broad mind to a narrow viewpoint because now he knows what Jesus is saying is going to impact his following in his footsteps. And there's also a complete reversal on Jesus' part too, because Jesus goes from saying, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church," last week, to today he says, "Get behind me, Satan, you're an obstacle. You're thinking not as God does, but as human beings do." So it's very interesting to think about it this way. Jesus never referred to Judas or to Pontius Pilate or to King Herod as a Satan. Only Peter. Very interesting. So this reversal sort of reminds me about some of the recent things happening about tearing down monuments and statues around our country and around our world. Because 1 week, Peter was standing very comfortably on a pedestal, and the next week, he's torn down to size and considered not only a present obstacle, but a Satan who has to be eradicated. So, looking around the church, we have many statues. If we had to tear down every statue of an imperfect saint, including over here St. Joseph, St. John Vianney, and the chapel, we would only be left with 2 standing, Jesus and Mary. St. Peter would be the first to go. So middle age in life and in faith, whenever it comes upon us, is when our metaphorical broad minds and narrow waist begin to change places. And so today's gospel presents us with this shift from last week to this week. We can often have a narrow point of view that says to us, well, coming to church Being a believer means, it should mean, an easier way of life with fewer problems than others because we're doing all the right things, lighter crosses to carry, and no major storms or hurricanes to throw us off course. So why does Jesus want his disciples to hear the lesson he's teaching to Peter and the lessons he wants us to learn? Well, maybe because that's the temptation. As disciples, we can think that being religious, doing the right things, coming to church should improve the quality of our lives. We should have good health and even some, if not some good fortune, at least some tranquility and serenity and some comforts in life. There's a popular evangelical preacher who, before COVID, would draw about 10,000 people to his stadium-like church. He has a great preaching style. And his message is that if we accept Jesus into our lives, we will receive good things, the blessings, and the rewards that God is eager, anxious to give to us even in this life, right now, today. That's not what Jesus tells us in the gospel today. It's clear that in some churches, the good things refer to especially financial, personal success. Some people call it the prosperity gospel. And it's no wonder that it's very popular and easy to receive. But we know that life doesn't always leave us feeling good all the time. We will have our faith tested by the world repeatedly. And we can all identify with that in different ways. So we treasure our faith. We do what we can to keep it strong, to nourish our faith. That's why we come back to hear the scriptures and to celebrate the Eucharist each week. But even the most devout and active Christians know being a Christian is never easy for all the time or very long. And so Peter doesn't understand that at this particular middle-age point in his life. While Jesus is the Messiah, he will continue his mission, and that will bring him right smack into suffering. Peter wants the glory, the good times, understandably, but Jesus spells out quite clearly, whoever wishes to come after me must take up his cross and follow me. Not that we go out looking for crosses, but they find us. I don't think that Jesus would fill an auditorium or attract 10,000 devotees or have his own television show with the message he announces today to Peter and the disciples. Who wants to hear that? But that's what we hear on this beautiful day. Jeremiah, St. Paul, and St. Peter have something in common, because in all three readings today, we see how they were each duped, seduced by God into doing things that they were naturally reluctant to do. So Jeremiah, that's the word, Jeremiah was duped, seduced into becoming a prophet despite his aversion to public speaking. St. Paul says that God wants us to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice. So don't conform yourself to the narrow, complacent life, he says, but be transformed by the constant renewal of a broad mind. And Peter, though he tried initially to persuade Jesus not to go to Jerusalem, he ended up going there with him, and later on, the same type of death. So, hanging around with God, paying attention to his call, following in the footsteps of Jesus can be hazardous to our personal agendas, because God can get us to love in ways and in places we never imagined. Just look at what happened in Louisiana and Texas this past week. A chain reaction of goodwill amid Hurricane Laura's chaos. For the most part, this disaster, like so many others, has brought out the very best in people, the very best in Americans, the best in human nature. As we see pictures of so many folks denying themselves, taking up their crosses handed to them, the cross of rescue and recovery. And just think of all of the crosses of 2020 so far this year. The coronavirus, the shutdown, racism issues, unrest and violence, the financial crisis, wildfires, hurricanes. What could be next? But in the midst of it all, we can still witness people going up to the various Jerusalems of life and taking up the crosses, the heavy crosses of rescue and recovery, of responding and rebuilding, of restoring hope that human life so often entails and Christian discipleship always requires. So Jesus tells us today to sort of have a will, to prepare a will to lose our lives so that we can find and save our lives, not by gaining the world, not by forfeiting our lives, but by taking up the various crosses that certainly come our way, large and small, knowing that our will is reviewed by God on the other side. The Son of God will repay all, as we hear at the end of the gospel, we will repay all according to our conduct, according to the way we just try to deal as best we can with all the crosses and the struggles of life. And therefore, like in any will, we will inherit something. We will inherit eternal life.